On a hot, dusty afternoon in Mafeking, South Africa, a young woman named Afia walked slowly into a small local shop. She wore old, worn-out slippers and a faded wrapper around her body. Her hair was tied back simply, and she carried no fancy bag or phone. Behind the counter stood Kwame, the proud owner of the kiosk. He glanced at her from head to toe, then burst out laughing. "Your type doesn't belong in my shop," he said loudly, with a smirk on his face. Other customers turned to look. Afia didn't respond. She just stood there quietly, looking around the shop. Kwame rolled his eyes and walked away, muttering something under his breath. He thought she was just another poor woman with nothing to offer. What he didn't know was that Afia had not come to buy anything. She was looking at the area, taking notes in her mind, watching how people were treated. He didn't know who she really was or what she had planned. To him, she was invisible, not important, just someone in slippers and a faded dress. But he had no idea that the same woman he mocked would soon change everything about his life. That laugh, that one moment of pride, would come back to him later, louder than he ever expected. Because Afia wasn't just anyone. She had come for a reason, and that reason would shake his world to the core. The small community clinic in Mafeking was always crowded. People waited on wooden benches, holding sick children, hoping for help. On that day, a mother sat in the corner, holding her baby close. The child was burning with fever, crying softly, and the mother looked helpless. She had no money to pay for the medicine the doctor said her baby needed. Tears filled her eyes. She didn't know what else to do. Then quietly, without anyone noticing at first, Afia stepped forward. She wore the same old slippers and a faded wrapper, just like the day she entered Kwame's shop. She looked like someone who could barely feed herself, let alone help anyone else. But she walked up to the nurse's table, leaned in, and whispered something. The nurse looked at her, surprised. Afia then pulled out some notes from a small pouch, enough to pay for the child's treatment in full, and even more. She didn't say her name. She didn't ask for thanks. She simply nodded and walked away like nothing had happened. The nurse stood frozen for a moment, then turned to one of her colleagues and whispered, "That's no ordinary girl." She had seen many kind people before, but there was something about Afia, her quiet presence, her strength, her calm, that felt different. She didn't look rich, but she carried herself like someone who had more than money, like someone who had power. But just then, standing near the doorway, was Kwame. He had come to pick up supplies for his shop and happened to overhear what the nurse said. He looked at Afia's back as she walked away and rolled his eyes. "Probably stolen money," he muttered with a cold laugh. "People like her can't be trusted." The nurse turned and looked at him, shocked. "That woman just paid for a stranger's child," she said softly. Kwame shrugged. "People do anything to look good. Maybe she wants attention." He didn't care. He had seen too many people like her, poor, desperate, pretending to be kind just to get something in return. At least that's what he believed. But what he didn't see was how the mother of the sick baby looked at Afia as she left, with tears of gratitude. What he didn't know was that this wasn't the first time Afia had helped someone, and it wouldn't be the last. She gave not because she wanted attention, but because she understood pain. She had seen suffering before and carried silent scars no one could see. Outside the clinic, the sun was hot. Afia walked slowly, unnoticed again. No one knew her name. No one knew her story. But those who had eyes to see could feel her spirit. A spirit too strong to be broken, too kind to be fake, and too deep to be explained. Back inside, the nurse folded the money and kept it safe. She would later tell the story to others, about the girl in slippers who saved a baby and disappeared. And each time, people would shake their heads in wonder. But Kwame, he never gave it another thought. To him, she was still just that poor girl who walked into his shop. He didn't know what was coming. He didn't know who she truly was. Because Afia was not the kind of person who showed off. She didn't speak much, but her actions shouted louder than any words. She believed that real power didn't need a loud voice or shiny clothes. Real power could sit quietly in the back of a clinic and change a life forever. And while Kwame stood in judgment, full of pride and empty of kindness, Afia was already planning something bigger, not just for herself, but for the people around her. She saw their struggles, She felt their pain, and she was already making moves quietly, like the wind before a storm. One day, the same people who ignored her would remember her. The ones who laughed would stop laughing, and those who doubted her, especially Kwame, would see her face in a place they never expected. But for now, she walked on, her head held high, her slippers dusty, her hands still warm from helping. The beggar they called her, she was anything but. It was early morning in Mafeking, and the sun was already warming the sleepy town. Afia walked quietly toward a small supermarket owned by none other than Kwame, the same man who had once laughed at her slippers. She still wore simple clothes, just like before. Her hair was tied back neatly, her wrapper old but clean. In her hands, she held a crumpled job application form. This was not just any job hunt. Afia was testing something, the heart and mind of the people who claimed to offer work. Kwame's shop wasn't doing so well. Shelves were half empty, and customers came and went quickly. Yet, he stood proudly behind the counter as if he owned the biggest supermarket in the country. When Afia stepped in, he looked up and frowned. He didn't recognize her. To him, she was just another poor girl looking for a job. She quietly handed him the form. "What's this?" he asked sharply. "I'd like to apply for the cleaning position," she said softly. Kwame stared at her for a second, then suddenly burst out laughing. "Cleaner? You?" He looked around as if waiting for someone else to laugh with him. Then, in one quick move, he tore the form in half and let the pieces fall to the ground. "We don't need your type here," he said with a smirk. "Only desperate, useless women clean floors. Try the next street. Maybe they need someone to carry dirt." Afia didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just bent down, picked up the torn paper, and quietly turned around. Not a word came out of her mouth. She walked out with the same calm look she had when she came in. But something had shifted, not in her, but in the air around her. Kwame watched her leave and shook his head. "Some people have no shame," he muttered. Little did he know, the same woman he had just insulted, again, was not who she appeared to be. He had no idea that this was her test. She wanted to see how employers treated women who looked like they had nothing. She wanted to understand how deeply the disrespect ran. Outside the shop, Afia paused for a moment. She looked at the torn paper in her hand, then at the street around her. Children were walking to school. Women were sweeping outside their homes. Life was moving on, slowly, quietly, but she was already thinking ahead. She wasn't angry. She was focused, because every insult, every rejection was only adding fuel to her fire. Inside the shop, Kwame went back to his work, proud of his decision. He believed he had shown strength, that he had kept the low-class people away. He didn't realize he had just slammed the door on an opportunity that could have saved his business. Because Afia was more than just a girl in old clothes. She was a silent storm, and while he stood there full of pride, his business was sinking, shelves empty, customers fewer each week, and no one to blame but himself. Afia didn't go home that day feeling sad. Instead, she sat under a tree and watched people walk by. She thought about all the women like her, the ones who were judged by their clothes, their jobs, or their silence. She thought about how the world treated cleaners like they were nothing, even though they kept everything clean. And in that quiet moment, she made a decision. One day, she would change how people like Kwame saw women. She would build something bigger than a supermarket. She would build dignity, strength, and power where people least expected it. But for now, she walked home, not with shame, but with purpose. Her torn job form was still in her hand, and her head was still held high. The girl Kwame thought was useless was walking straight into her destiny, because power doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes it walks out of a shop quietly, only to return one day with the power to buy it. It was just another normal morning in Mafeking. People were opening their shops, sweeping the dust from the doorways, and preparing for another long, hot day. Kwame was standing outside his supermarket, looking tired and frustrated. Business had been bad lately. Fewer customers came in, and he had no idea why. He blamed the economy, the weather, even the workers. But the truth was, his bad attitude had driven people away. Still, he held his head high, thinking he was better than most. Then something strange happened. People started gathering near the street corner. Some were pointing at something in the distance. Others were taking photos with their phones. A large truck had come during the night and placed a giant new billboard at the entrance of the road. It was tall, colourful, and impossible to miss. Kwame wiped his hands and walked closer, curious. As he got near, he froze. His eyes went wide. His mouth dropped open. The billboard had a huge photo of a woman smiling confidently in a smart business suit. Her name was written in bold letters across the top. Afia Owusu, Africa's youngest female tech billionaire. Below that, another line read, investing $40 million in local development projects. But that's not what made Kwame drop his bag. What hit him like thunder was the final line. First project location, Mafeking, Main Street, supermarket zone. His street, his shop, right there, next to her face, was a map showing the exact area, his very own neighbourhood. Kwame took a step back. He stared at the billboard again. No, it couldn't be her. Not the same girl in the old slippers. Not the one he laughed at. Not the woman he insulted when she applied for a cleaning job. He remembered her wrapper, her quiet voice, her torn job form on the floor. And now she was a billionaire. People around him started whispering, "Isn't that the girl Kwame threw out of his shop? Didn't she pay for a child's treatment at the clinic? Look at her now." Kwame's hands began to shake. His pride, his confidence, everything started to crumble. He suddenly felt small, like the dust under people's feet. All this time, he thought he was the one with power, with control. But now he saw the truth. The girl he mocked had been watching, planning, building. She didn't shout back when he insulted her. She didn't argue. She didn't try to prove herself. She just walked away and changed her whole world. Now her face was shining above his shop, and her name was on everyone's lips. Across town, shops were talking. Newspapers were covering the story, and even the radio was playing her name on repeat. Afia Owusu, the announcer said, a young tech genius, born in silence, now shaking Africa with kindness and power. People were inspired. Mothers told their daughters, "Be like her." Men shook their heads in disbelief, remembering how they had ignored or laughed at her. And Kwame? He stood under the billboard for hours, not speaking, not moving, just looking up at the giant photo of the woman he had once thought was nothing. Now she owned everything around him, and she hadn't even spoken a single word to him since. Somewhere not far away, Afia was watching all of it from a quiet car. No reporters, no cameras. She smiled gently as she saw the crowd gathering. Not for revenge, not for pride, but for change. She hadn't forgotten the pain, but she had transformed it into power. She didn't need to shout, "Look at me now!" The billboard did that for her. The investment did that. Her actions spoke louder than any insult she had received. And still she stayed silent. Because Afia wasn't just building companies. She was building a new story. One where quiet girls rise, where kindness wins, and where dignity walks back into places it was thrown out of. That day, Mafeking saw more than a billboard. They saw a legend begin. The whole town was buzzing with excitement. It was the day everyone had been waiting for. The ribbon-cutting ceremony of the new development centre in Mafeking. Big white tents were set up, red carpets rolled out, and cameras from every local media outlet were ready to capture the moment. People stood in long lines just to get a glimpse of the woman who had changed their town almost overnight. Her name was everywhere now, Afia Owusu. Her face was on newspapers, billboards, even small radios talked about her all day. She had become a symbol of hope, power, and surprise. Kwame, standing inside his dull supermarket just across the road, felt a strange mix of panic and regret. Every day since the billboard reveal had felt like a nightmare to him. Customers had stopped coming like before. People walked past his shop to go take pictures in front of Afia's signs. Some of them even whispered and laughed when they looked at him. The shame was too heavy to carry. He couldn't take it anymore. On the morning of the event, he dressed in his best shirt, sprayed strong cologne, and walked toward the red carpet with nervous hands. He told himself he would apologize, maybe even say he made a mistake, that he didn't recognize her, that he was having a bad day. Anything, He just wanted a chance to fix what he had broken. But as he tried to get closer to the entrance, 3 tall security guards in black suits stepped in front of him. They crossed their arms and didn't even blink. "I need to speak with her," Kwame said quickly. "Just 2 minutes, please." One of the guards shook his head calmly and replied, "Madame said you're not welcome here." Kwame blinked in shock. No, I know her. I mean, I didn't know it was her before, but..." The guard raised a hand and interrupted. "She doesn't work for you. She owns everything around you now." The words hit like a punch to his chest. People nearby started to notice. Some took out their phones. Others whispered his name. Cameras turned in his direction. Suddenly, the proud man who once laughed at a girl in old slippers was now standing outside her grand event, begging to be let in and being denied. Kwame's legs gave in. He slowly dropped to his knees, eyes wide, heart racing. He couldn't believe this was happening. Just a few months ago, he had insulted her to her face. He thought she was a nobody. Now she had built a centre right next to his shop, and he wasn't even allowed inside. The guards didn't move. They just stood like statues, calm and strong. Kwame stayed on the ground, broken by the truth. It was over. The woman he looked down on had risen so high that he couldn't even reach her shadow now. Inside the event, Afia stood tall, dressed in a clean white outfit, smiling softly as she cut the ribbon with the young girls beside her. The crowd clapped, cameras flashed, and reporters asked questions. But Afia didn't mention Kwame. She didn't talk about revenge. She didn't speak about the past. She only spoke about the future, about schools, about helping women start businesses, and about giving people a second chance. But not everyone deserved that chance right away. From where she stood, she could see him on the screen, kneeling, helpless, just outside the gate. She turned her face away and walked toward the building, her steps light, her heart steady. She didn't need to prove anything. The world had seen enough, and so had Kwame. In that moment, he learned the hard truth. The girl he once mocked had become the woman who built a world where he no longer had a seat. And the world would never forget how he tried to walk back into her life, only to be stopped by the words, "She doesn't work for you. She owns everything around you." It had only been a few weeks since the ribbon-cutting ceremony, but Mafikeng had already changed. The streets were cleaner, the people more hopeful, and everywhere you turned, there was a new sense of pride. Afia Owusu's name had become more than just a name. It was a symbol. Children wanted to grow up like her. Women walked taller. Men spoke her name with respect. But one person still walked with heavy steps. Kwame. He had once laughed at a girl in worn-out sandals. Now he walked past her buildings every day, ashamed, invisible to the world he used to look down on. His supermarket was still open, barely. The shelves were emptier than ever, and even the regular customers had found better places to shop. He tried everything, discounts, new signs, even hiring a local DJ to play music outside the door. But it didn't work. People had moved on. He didn't know that Afia had been watching, quietly, carefully. She had no interest in revenge. She was doing something bigger, something that would speak louder than words. Then, one morning, the big news broke again. Afia Owusu had just bought the entire supermarket chain, not just the one shop on Main Street, the whole group of stores that Kwame's small shop was connected to. It had been struggling for years, and Afia, with a single decision, saved hundreds of jobs, but also made one move that shocked everyone. She closed Kwame's old supermarket for good. People stood outside, staring at the new banner going up. The faded sign that once said Kwame's Market was gone. In its place was a bold, beautiful new name. The Owusu Women's Business Training Center. Free courses, free coaching, free resources, everything focused on helping women in the area learn how to start and grow their own businesses. The very shop where Kwame had once told Afia she was useless was now filled with powerful women ready to take over their futures. On opening day, women of all ages filled the rooms. Some carried babies on their backs. Some had never finished school. Some had been laughed at just like Afia. But now, they were students, dreamers, leaders in training. And the first lesson written on the whiteboard was simple: never judge power by clothing. The women nodded. Some cried. Others clapped. Because they understood it deeply. They had lived it. Afia didn't just teach business. She taught dignity. She gave them more than tools. She gave them the belief that they were worth more than how they looked. From across the street, Kwame stood frozen. He didn't need anyone to tell him what had happened. He already knew. That shop used to be his pride. He once stood behind the counter feeling like a king. Now, he couldn't even step inside. He watched as women walked in smiling, confident, strong. He watched as his past mistakes were turned into someone else's future. He thought about the time he had torn Afia's job application, the words he had said, the way he had laughed, the way he had looked at her like she was nothing. Now, that nothing had become everything. The woman he rejected had turned his shop into a place where others would rise. She didn't punish him. She didn't take his name to the press or drag him down. She just bought everything and changed the story, quietly, completely. And that was the ultimate power move. Not revenge, not shouting, just action, just building. Kwame slowly walked away from the building. The sound of laughter and learning followed him like a shadow. He knew there was no going back. That shop was no longer his. That chapter was over. And Afia, she didn't need to be in the room. Her presence was already everywhere. In every smiling face, every business plan, every woman who believed she could succeed. Her power wasn't in money or fame. It was in how she lifted others, even after they tried to pull her down. The ultimate lesson wasn't about business. It wasn't about success. It was about never underestimating anyone, especially not a woman in slippers. Kwame could no longer sleep at night. The world around him had changed, and he was no longer a part of it. His supermarket was gone, his pride crushed, and his name was now whispered in shame. Everyone remembered how he had treated Afia, how he had laughed at her slippers, mocked her clothes, rejected her job application, and thrown cruel words at her without a second thought. But now she was the one building the future, and he was just a man with a heavy past. He knew he needed to face her, not to defend himself, not to beg for a second chance in business, but simply to say the words he should have said a long time ago. I am sorry. After many attempts, phone calls, messages, and letters that got no reply, he finally got a message from her office. Afia had agreed to meet him, but only for 5 minutes, nothing more. Kwame showed up early, dressed in a clean shirt and holding his cap in his hands. His knees were weak, his voice stuck in his throat. When the door opened and he was invited inside, he could barely walk. The room was quiet, modern, filled with the calm energy of someone who had nothing to prove. Afia sat behind a simple desk. She looked peaceful, elegant, and strong, not loud or proud, just calm. Kwame stood there silently, unable to speak for a moment. He looked at her and saw not just the billionaire or the powerful woman, but the girl he had insulted, who had come to his shop in slippers, only to build an empire on that very street. He finally whispered, "Thank you for meeting me. I know I was wrong. I treated you badly. I didn't know who you were. I made a mistake. I just wanted to say sorry from my heart." Afia listened without interrupting. Her eyes didn't show anger. They didn't show pity either, just quiet strength. Then she spoke. Her voice was soft, but her words cut deep. "You thought I was poor," she said slowly, "because you're poor in character." Kwame's head dropped. Those words hit harder than anything he had heard in his life. He had no argument, no excuse. He had judged her based on clothes, based on how she looked, based on her silence, but he had never judged his own behavior. She continued, still calm, still sharp. "You mocked me. You said only useless and desperate women clean floors. But the truth is, real work is never shameful. What's shameful is how you treated people." Then she reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a sheet of paper. It was a job application. She slid it across the desk toward him. Cleaner position. Kwame's eyes filled with tears. The same job he had once said was only for desperate people. Now it was offered to him. Not to embarrass him, not to mock him, but to teach him. This was the moment where life gave him the same test he once failed to give someone else. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't smile or smirk. She simply said, "You said only desperate people clean, right?" Kwame couldn't look up. He nodded slowly, his voice gone, his pride gone. The clock ticked. The 5 minutes were almost over. She stood up and gently said, "This was never about money, Kwame. It was about respect, about how you treat people who can't fight back. I didn't come from wealth, but I came from values. That's something you didn't see." She walked toward the door and opened it. "I hope you learn," she said, "because now you've seen what real power looks like." Kwame walked out of the office with the job application in his hand. He didn't know if he would fill it or tear it up. All he knew was that this time, he would never judge a person by their clothes again, never speak down to someone doing honest work, never mistake silence for weakness, because the woman he once looked down on had given him the most powerful lesson of his life, and she did it in just 5 minutes. Afia had done more than anyone expected. In just a few short months, she changed the entire town. Where there were once broken buildings and empty promises, now stood schools filled with young minds, clinics that gave free care to the sick, and training centers where women learned how to run their own businesses. People stopped talking about poverty and started talking about possibility. Children knew her name. Mothers thanked her in their prayers. But just as the town began to shine, Afia quietly stepped away from the spotlight. No interviews, no speeches, no social media. It was like she had vanished into thin air, like a powerful storm that had come, changed everything, and moved on without warning. People kept asking where she went, but no one really knew. Some said she moved to another country. Others believed she was helping somewhere else, silently. All that was certain was that she had left a legacy behind, a mark that could never be erased. Then one afternoon, Kwame walked into a bank. Life had been hard, and he was hoping for a small loan to start fresh. As he waited for his number to be called, his eyes wandered to a golden plaque behind the counter. His heart skipped a beat. It read, "Branch owner, Afia Owusu." He froze. The same name, the same woman, the same girl in slippers. But this time, he didn't smirk. He didn't roll his eyes. He bowed his head, not in fear, but in deep, silent respect. Because now, he understood, true power doesn't need to shout. It simply builds, then disappears, leaving the world forever changed.